are on Daf Gimel on the base 3b, just at the bottom. We had the first opinion that said that the difference between the two measures that we would have within an amma, that we would have an amma that is of 5 tefach and an amma of 6 tefachim. And here we're going to have another measure of, and the Gemara said that it's always going to be l'chumra. We're going to go stringent, whichever one that is. And we have a teaching of Rava that it's going to be a distinction between whether the amas are sochakos or atzavis. They are tight together, or which is atzav, like sad, or sochakos, they are happy, so they are broad. V'rava mishmei Rav Nachman. Second last line on Gimel Amud Beis. V'rava mishmei Rav Nachman amar kol amas be'aba bashisha. All of the measures of a amma are an amma of 6 tefachim. So that's not going to be the distinction, but rather ela halalu sochakos v'halalu atzavis. These are broader, or these are tighter. Meisaveh, so ask a contradiction. We see that it says that every amma is a 6 tefach amma. And I would go to Dalit. As long as they are not, literally means exacting. And that's what we said before, that they would be either 5 or 6. So what does it mean? So Bishlam Rava. So according to Rava, we can say what it means is that these are they're not exact, meaning these are going to be looser, and therefore it's going to take up more space on account of that. You keep it loose together. You're not squeezing it together tight, but rather you just put them next to each other, and it's looser, so it takes up more space. So when measuring the 6 tefachim, 6 fists, so you're going to give yourself more space. And by these, wherever you need to be strict, you're going to be tighter with it. Ella l'Abaya, but according to Abaya, kasha. But according to Abaya, it's going to be a question, because Abaya said there's going to be a distinction between someone are amma of 5 and someone amma of 6. And here you have all the ammas are the Brisa says that they're all an amma of 6. Abaya says Ema amas kilayim ba'amma bashisha. Well, maybe that Brisa is talking about kilayim, meaning in the mixed seed, and there indeed we say it's all an amma of 6. As we saw that there, in order to be strict, we're going to say that the space between the end of the vineyard and before you can start planting your other vegetables or your grains are going to be need more space. Since at the end of that Bryce it says, but Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that in regards to mixed seed, all the measures have to be an amma of 6 tefachim. As long as it is not tight or exact. So from there we can see if the Brisa says that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, oh, you only need a 6 tefach amma in regards to mixed seed, kilayim, that tells us that the Tanakama is not speaking only about kilayim. And so back to the question on Abaya, the Tanakama, kol amma is kama. Abaya is going to respond to that. Well, you're right. The first opinion in the Bryce is going to say that all amos are 6 are amos of 6 tefachim. But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says what I just said, that only in regards to kilayim is it 6 amma, 6 tefach amma. The rest of the measures are always going to be strict and have a smaller measure and an obligation already with a smaller measure, and therefore it's going to be a 5 5 tefach amma. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that. And no, the Amrik Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So my teaching that I have is in concurrence with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So the Gemara says, okay, so L'Abaye Vadai Tanai. So according to Abaye, we just explained that this is indeed a machlokes. L'Rava mi lema Tanai. According to Rava, do we have to say that it's a machlokes? Do we say that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel argues and says that by kilayim, it's only only by kilayim, only by mixed seed is it a 6 tefach, but by all other measures such as sukkah and mavoi and the alleyway, then we're going to say that it was a 5 tefach measure. And so when Rava said that all things are measured by 6, it's only according to one opinion, but Rabbi Shimon Gamliel disagrees. Or can we say that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel also is in concurrence with the teaching that Rava said? Obviously, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel being generations before, it doesn't mean that he's concurring with Rava, but that rather that Rava's opinion is not is according to everybody. Rava's teaching.
What confused me here? Wouldn't it presumably mean Rava learned from Rav? Who was Rava's Rebbe? Was Rav, right?
His Rebbe's Rebbe would have been Rav. It's the next generation.
I mean, why? I mean, he learned it from his Rebbe like this. He didn't make it up. Why does he have to go find a Tana who agrees with him? I mean, he learned it from his Rebbe.
Now, okay, let me just finish the teaching there. I'll give you a little primer on that. 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Or do we say that Rabbi Shimon Gamliel does not disagree with this? And even though that he says that in regards to kilayim, it's a measure of 6. Really, everything was a measure of 6 tefachim. But what he's trying to say is that as long as it's not mechuvanas, it's not going to be exacting, because sometimes it's a tighter, broader tefach, and sometimes it's a tighter and narrower tefach, and sometimes it's a broader tefach, which we call sochakos, a happy, or atzava is sad. And therefore, all Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying is, by the way, you should know that in regards to kilayim, you can't be too tight and exacting. You have to give it more space, and it's going to be a broader tefach. So maybe that's what's going on. So just to your question, of course, when Rava said something and Abaye is teaching something, they're teaching what they learned, and based on brises they know. So, of course, that's what we're just looking to see where their source in Tanaic generation teaching is. Because Abaye and Rava would not disagree with a Mishnah or a Brisa or anyone in the Tanaic era. Therefore, we look at, okay, so which Brisa are they teaching? And are they in concurrence with an opinion, or are all the opinions of the Brisas don't concur, or the halacha isn't that way, and therefore it would be a question. That's how we always look when we look for when we ask a question from a brisa to Abaye or to Rava, as we just did. That's because Abaye and Rava wouldn't disagree with the brisa, and of course they're not coming up with this themselves. They're teaching what they learn, but we're looking for a source, and if all the sources we find concur with one and not the other, that would be a tiyufta. We would say, well, we have a brisa against this, and then often the Gemara will say, well, it was misreading of this brisa that led to that mistake. What we're doing over here is we're trying to see Rava's teaching. Is that based on one opinion of the brisa, or actually Rava's teaching is everybody's opinion in the brisa, and the brisa, both the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel would agree that in regards to all measures, we go with a measure of 6 tefachim, and it's only and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is only speaking about how tight or how loose you're going to measure those 6 tefachim in order to get the kilayim as far apart, the grapes as far apart from your new grains. Amal Harava, so Rava is going to say, Rav Shimon Gamliel ha'asal hashmi'inan. Rav Shimon Gamliel also would follow the opinion that everything needs an amma of 6 tefachim. So that's not a disagreement. Rather, he's coming to teach us this idea that amas kilayim le'itzamtzim, that when you're dealing with a measure of an amma in regards to kilayim, mixed seeds, don't be tight. Don't push your tefachim together and get a small measure, but rather make sure that your measure is broader, and so your tefachim are going to be looser, and so you're going to get a farther distance when measuring your grains from your grapes. So why didn't he just say that? When you're measuring the amma of kilayim, don't be so tight. Why do you have to say it's 6 tefachim? So why do you say that it's 6 tefachim in the amma? Wouldn't you say that indicates that he holds the amma of sukkah and the amma of mavoi were more than 6 tefachim? Were less than 6 tefachim. They were 5. No, it's dealing with only in the measure of the base of the mizbeach and the protrusion of the lower part of the mizbeach from the upper part of the mizbeach, which was used as a walkway at about midpoint of the mizbeach. The Sefer it says, "Ve'ela midas hamizbeach ba'amos, amma v'tefach, v'cheik ha'ama v'ama." So Rashi has 2 interpretations. We could go with the final interpretation of Rashi in reading this, but essentially in Yechezkel, in speaking of the measure, it says, and these are the measures of the mizbeach in amos. Each amma is amma v'tefach. Each amma would be one amma that has an extra tefach within it. So it's an amma of 6. The chayk, but the base of the mizbeach, and the chayk would be the base, as the Gemara is going to tell us, it is not measured with the amma that has an amma plus the tefach, meaning the 6 tefach amma, but rather the chayk ha'ama, and the base has just an amma measure, meaning a 5 tefach amma, and also v'ama rochav, also the amma of its width, which is the lower base of the mizbeach, and the upper part of the mizbeach, which the lower base had an extra width to it. That width was 1 amma, and that was a 5 tefach amma. Ugvula sfasa saviv zeres echad, and the gvul at the top, which we said is which the Gemara is going to tell us is the horn, which was basically a square amma at each corner that was like a protrusion up. Those also were a smaller amma. So the Gemara explains. So zeres v'zeh gava mizbeach, and this is the top of the mizbeach as well. So chayk ha'ama zeh yesod. So the chayk, the base of an amma, that's the base of the mizbeach. So the mizbeach had a base, which was an amma high, amma and an amma in. And then it had a half of the height of mizbeach was not exactly half, but half of the mizbeach was another amma in, and that was used as a walkway. And then came the top of the mizbeach, which we'd call, let's say, the mizbeach itself, and then with 4 corner horns. And those measures that we just mentioned, not the entirety of the mizbeach, but these one steps in, that each level of the base to the walkway to the mizbeach itself, those were a smaller amma. So chayka amma zeh, that's the bottom base of 1 amma. The amma rochav, and the amma width zeh, that's the walkway around, which was another amma in. Ugvula el sfasa saviv, and the borders at its lips around. Ela Koronas, these are the four corners that had a Amma square as its horn. V'zeh Gava Mizbeach, and the cover of the Mizbeach, Zeh Mizbeach Hazav, it's the golden Mizbeach, which also that its Amma was such a measure. But in general, other than these three measured, all times we have a measure Amma, which is a 6 tefach Amma. John, you posted a question. I didn't see.
I was just saying that, so when they use the word all, it doesn't really mean all.
Correct. Say there's an exception to the rule, but the rule is a 6 tefach Amma.
Right.
Okay, just give me a second, please. Amar Rabbi Tzvi Barashi Amar Rav. Rabbi Tzvi Barashi said in the name of Rav, Shiurin Chatzitzin U'Mechitzin Halacha Mishmasinai. That whenever we have a measure of every mitzvah, all the mitzvahs, almost all the mitzvahs in the Torah have a prescribed action that has to be done, and usually there's a measure that's required there. How large, how small, how often, how big, all these things are a measure. So, and the Torah rarely gives any measure for anything. So, shiurin, the measure, is halacha Moshe Sinai. That is a halacha that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yeshua from Sinai. Chatzitzin, we'll see also what counts as a barrier between a mikveh water and a body is halacha Moshe Sinai. Now, the Gemara is going to tell us that actually the Torah already says that the mikveh has to wash off the entire body. So therefore, that part's not the chatzitza. Rather, the leniency of where there may be some chatzitza is halacha Moshe Sinai. Umechitzin and boundaries, or actually barriers. That's also halacha Moshe Sinai. And we'll see in regards to which halachas this applies, that it's halacha Moshe Sinai to know what counts as a halachic barrier, as a wall. So all of these halacha Moshe Sinai. These are halacha that don't have a Torah source, but rather they are the mitzvah from Sinai. It's the oraisa in the same way, but it's by tradition alone.
But we have lots of different measures. We have measures for Tzipori, Yerushalayim, Midbarios, all this kind of thing. So how did they justify, if it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, then there's got to be some standard, consistent measure. So how do they justify that they, from time to time?
Actually, it's not consistent. Many of the poskim write that the reason the Torah gave measures not by a particular item, but rather by human measure, such as a fistful, arm length, etc., is because they are not meant to be exact, based on a measure that could be lost. So that cup that Moshe gave, or that teaspoon that Moshe had, but rather it's based on an average of what in that time and space is a fist. So the average tefach, and that's what it is. And so that's something that is changes in time along with the people. So it does not have to be exact the measure and the size that Moshe had, but rather it's given in a average of that time. That being said, what you're talking about of various measures that changed, what changed is precisely what we were talking about. The size of that vessel changed. So when we talk about a pint or a quart, right? Well, whose quart? Is it an American, or is it European? That's what's going on. So we had certain measures, but that measure itself in a different place was a different size, and so you had a measure in Sipari versus the measure in Midbar, because the measure changed, but the size remained the same, and therefore we said, let's say it's Chameshes Orvoim Kemach. 5/4, so it's a quarter plus 1 1/4 of flour is what's obligated in challah. That's because the measures changed, got smaller, and therefore you need more in it in order to equal what the measure originally was. So it's not that the amount changed, but the calculation of that amount, because the measure itself changed. And we were off track. If you didn't understand that, that's fine as well, because the point is that the halachas of what each mitzvah or prohibition would be in measure are halacha Moshe Messina. So the Gemara says, Shiurin d'oraisa u'd'chsiv. What are you talking about? The measures, they're actually written in the Torah, as we read in this parasha, the previous parasha. Eretz chita sa'ora, the land of wheat and barley, right? And there it says Gefentein and Verimon, grape, fig, and pomegranate. Eretz Yishem and Advash, the land of oil olives and nectar, which is dates. V'amar Rabbi Chanan, and Rabbi Chanan said, Kala pasuk azel shiurin, and this entire pasuk was written in regards to the manner of measurements for mitzvahs. Namra chita. It says chita. What halacha do we learn of wheat? So what's the size of a wheat kernel? A wheat berry. As we learned, if somebody is coming in to a house that had a nega, which is a blemish, let's call it leprosy, and made the tumah of nega in the house. So anybody that comes into the house and the clothing being carried is also coming into the house, because it's not secondary to the person, because the person is carrying it. So instantaneously, immediately as they come into the house, there's tumah. They're tumah right away. However, if he was wearing his clothing and he's wearing his shoes and his rings are on his fingers, he came into the house, so he's tummy right away. However, the clothing is secondary to him. So it's not tummy immediately, because they didn't come into the house. So they're going to be tummy only that which is like anything else which is in the house already. And being in the house is only going to be tummy at the measure of when there's enough time to eat, kidei achilas pras, enough time to eat a portion of bread. And we'll see what type of bread: wheat bread. You can eat a portion of bread. What kind of bread? Wheat bread, which gets eaten quicker than barley bread. Mesav, and while he is leaning, so not when he's eating quickly, but rather he's eating this loaf of wheat bread while leaning, meaning he sat down to a meal in a proper manner. They would, if they were just snacking, they would be upright. When they were eating a meal, they'd be leaning on their side. So mesa, but it's also he's eating it quicker because he does have something to dip the bread in. So he's eating it with bread. So this is the manner within which it counts as a proper eating wheat bread while leaning, with some dips. So and what halachic measure do we have from barley? The Tanam we learned etzem kasara matama b'magav b'masav and matama b'oil. in order for a person to be tameh from contact with a deceased person. So if he's actually touching the deceased or a part of the deceased, and he's carrying the deceased or part of the deceased, this person would be tameh in as much as a barley size of bone or deceased person. We saw elsewhere the halachas of how much blood would count, but that's different. And as far as the tissue, human tissue, it would be a barley size. However, in regards to tumas ohel, where the tent being under the same roof, under the same space, would cause tuma, there a barley size is not sufficient. It would require the majority of the torso or the skeleton of the bodily structure of the skeleton, and there are particular halachas as to which bones count as a majority of the skeleton. Geffen, what halachas do we learn of a grape? Kedei revius yain lenazir. The prohibition of a nazir of drinking wine would be a revius of wine, a quarter lug measure of wine would be enough to hold him responsible for transgressing. Now we turn to Dalet Amud Beis, Te'ena, and the fruit, the fig. What is that in regards? Kurgageres Litzar Shabbos. In Shabbos, we saw that the minimum requisite amount of carrying any food would be that it's the size of Kurgageres, of a dried fig. Any less than that is not a significant enough carrying outside, carrying in a public domain that someone would be responsible for. And we saw in various foods what would constitute various items, what would constitute the minimum. But with food, Kurgageres, a fig, is the measure. Rimon, and regards to a pomegranate, as we learned in regards to Tumah, we've seen it several times now, that a vessel that becomes tameh, once it's a broken vessel and no longer usable, it loses its Tumah status. So how much of a hole or a crack does the vessel need in order to be a non-vessel? So we saw that a commercial vessel, as soon as it's broken, you're not going to sell that anymore. And if you're doing a lot of handling of merchandise, you can't of grains, etc. You can't afford to have a vessel that has a hole in it. And so in business world, there is no tumah on a vessel as long if it has any hole. However, people could not afford to just swap out their baskets or their vessels if it had a small hole in it, and so they would use it if it had a hole that could not hold grain. So they would use it for olives. If it could not hold olives, they would use it for walnuts. If it couldn't hold walnuts, they would use it for pomegranates. So once it had the size, it had a hole the size of motzi riman, that a pomegranate could fall out of it, then it was no longer a vessel if it was in a private home. So the halacha could not, as we learn, called kli balibatim, private person's vessels. Shiuron karimanim, the measure of breaking it in order to create the destruction of the tummy vessel, and therefore it's no longer tummy, and you can start reconstructing it, would be kamotzi riman, that a pomegranate would come through the hole. Eretz shemen, and what about the oil olives? Eretz shekol shireh kazesim. That means that all other measures are kazesim. All measures are kazesim. And here the Gemara asks, like John asked before, kol shireh, all the measures? You just listed a whole bunch of things that have other measures than an olive size. So ikahani damra. What it means to say is that all the measures, besides for the ones we're listing, which is basically almost all of the measures, go with the kazayas. How much it constitutes eating something is a kazayas. Kazayas, an olive size, like an olive size, that's the general halachic measure for things. Dvash, what about the size of a date? The measure for somebody to be liable for kares, for eating on Yom Kippur, is eating the date size, a keseves. And when it says, okay, so how can you tell me measures are halacha Moshe Sinai? They're not based in the written Torah. They are a tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Sinai all the way down to us. So then when it says, how can you say that we have all these measures hinted to in the Torah by telling us the blessing of Eretz Yisrael and the 7 species of Eretz Yisrael? But Tizber, so when it says, do you really think shiuran michtav k'tivi, that these constitute as if the Torah had written these measures? These are not written. Ella helchaseninu. Really, it's halacha Moshe Sinai. V'asmachinu Rabban Akra, and the Chachamim found a hint to it and supported it by this hint. But there's nothing in this verse other than the blessing of Eretz Yisrael, the bracha of Eretz Yisrael, and the fruit, and these fruit. Of course, there is also a hint to something else. We have a support there, but that's not a source. That's not what that pasuk means to say, and that's not really the source. It doesn't really tell us what measures go to what thing, and so therefore it's a rabbinic support for what we already know as halacha mashmisin. Chatzitzin the oraisin. The Gemara says chatzitzin. You say that halacha mashmisin we have the barrier between water in the mikveh and the body. Well, that too is the oraisa. That's already in the Torah. The Chsifra says, "V'rachatz b'mayim is kol b'sar," and he will wash in water his entire body. So you see, the entire body needs to be enveloped in the water. There cannot be any barrier between the person, the flesh, and the water. And this that it says b'mayim, in water, b'mayim is kol b'sari, the water of his whole body, tells me b'may mikvah shekol b'sari, kol b'sari mayim shekol gufa elo behem. It has to be mikvah water that the entire body can fit into. V'kamahin, and how much water, what kind of mikvah, what's the minimum size of a mikvah that the entire body can go into? Mayim shekol gufa elo behem v'kamahin ama al ama barum gimel amas. If you had a space that was 1 amma by an amma with 3 ammas high of water, that would count as a kosher mikvah. And the Chachamim measure that and to be 40 seah. So again, so what we see in that brisa is that it's in the Torah itself. And where it says, you're right, we need that to tell us that not only the entire body needs to go into mikvah, but there can't be a chatzitza in the hair. So if somebody has dirt in their hair, so you'd think, well, the water is touching the entire flesh, besara, but hair is a protrusion off the body, so perhaps that can have a chatzitza in there. And so they say, no, that's what this teaching is. Okay, the Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, the Amar Rabbi Rav Huna, like Rabbi Rav Huna said, Nima achas kashura. If there's a knot in a single hair, so since it's knotted in itself, in a single hair strand, it's going to be too tight for water to get into. Chatzetzas, and it would count as a chatzitza. Sholosh ein chotzin. If there are 3 hairs knotted together, that knot would not be so tight, and the water can get through, and it doesn't count as a chatzitza. Shtayim. If it's 2, any day, I don't know whether that counts as a chatzitza or not. So the Gemara says that too is not a new idea. Sara nami the oraiso. Well, even the barrier in the hair is also based on the pasuk of the Torah. The time we learned v'rachatzas kol b'sara. It says, and he will wash in water. Isn't as kol basara, should say as basara. Why his flesh? Why did it say kol basara? Kol is to teach as kol basara. It's s hatavala basara. The s, the superfluous over there is to tell you. So the kol is there to tell you no barriers, and s kol basara is to tell you that even the hair, even that which is secondary to the body also is going to be that which is with the body, meaning hair, zeu saur. That also cannot have a chatzitza. So Gemara says you're right. That the halacha l'Moshe Messina is actually coming to teach you a leniency here. On a Torah, if we in the simple reading of the Torah, any barrier anywhere on the body, any size, counts as a barrier. Because the Torah says, "V'rachas kol b'sar, v'rachas b'mayim is kol b'sar," and he will wash all his body, all his flesh in the water. So kiyase halachas, the halach is coming to tell you l'ruba l'miyuta, to tell you if it was a something that covered only part of the body, less than 50% of the body, that would not count as a proper chatzitza on a Torah level. And also, ulamakbid or shein makbid. Also, if it's more than a measure that more than 50% of the body, but you want it there, it needs to be there. So somebody that has something that they don't want off, that would count as that would not count as a chatzitza. So think if somebody had nail polish, that's something that's eino makbid. If it's nice and neat, that would be considered an eino makbid, something I don't want off. Somebody did a henna writing, they don't want it off. Or even more lenient than just not wanting it off is where I don't want it there, but I also don't care that it's there. So somebody whose job is I don't know, they're an artist, a painter, whatever, and their hands are always have some spots on it, and they don't care. So it's not that they want it there, but they don't care that it's there, and they would go to a wedding with it on because they don't care that it's there. That's a part of what it is. So that would not count as a chatzitza. So that the concept, so it's a leniency. The Allah HaMashiach Messina tells us a leniency when the Torah says it's kol b'sara, entire body, that there can't be a barrier. Actually, the halacha tells us there can be a barrier as long as A, it's not the majority of the body, or B, you don't mind that it's there. You want it there. Or Rabbi Yitzchak, like Rabbi Yitzchak said, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Devar Torah, on a Torah level, Ruba umakbid alav chotzitz. Only if you have both, where it's the majority of the body and you don't want it there. That's where it's a chatzitza. She'ena makbid alav. But if it's something that you don't mind that it's there, in fact, maybe you even want it there, such as, and we mentioned, let's say nail polish. Eina chotzitz, that's not a chatzitza. V'gazra al ruba she'ena makbid mishum ruba hamakbid. However, but when something is the majority of the body, even if you don't mind that it's there, the Chachamim said, well, what's to tell whether you really want it or don't, and whether you want it off or not, and people won't know the distinction, and that's so subjective. And therefore, Chazal said, anything that covers the majority of the body is going to count as a chatzitza. So the Halacha Mishmei Sinai says, on a Torah level, it's only if it's the majority of the body and you don't want it. But the Chachamim said, well, that's subjective, and therefore, even if you want it, if it covers the majority of the body, get rid of it. It should not be. It should not be there. It's a chatzitz. And also, if you don't want something there, even if it's so small that it's less than the majority of the body, and maybe it's tiny, nevertheless, if you don't want it there, get rid of it before you go to the mikveh, because since it's on there and you don't want it, maybe people will not be careful and it'll be even the majority of the body. And therefore, Chazal said, if you don't want it, it always has to get off. Well, why didn't we say also take it one step further and say, even if you want it there and it's small? So, for instance, like we just mentioned, a nail polish, if you want it there, and it's less than 50% of the body, so therefore it should be allowed to remain. Halachically, it is allowed to remain. It is allowed to remain, and someone can go to the mikveh with nail polish on. So why didn't Chazal say that also should be prohibited? Because maybe someone's going to make a mistake. 2 steps. Or if you have something on the majority of the body, but you don't want it, so therefore if somebody's going to make a mistake and compare it. The Gemara says no. He gufa gzeira v'ananekin menigza gzeira. That itself is a offense that people are going to make a mistake, and you're going to take it to the next level and make offense to the fence, gzeira. No, we don't do that. John asked, so how come today the halacha is that we suggest people remove nail polish from or let's say makeup. People want makeup. Why do we say to take it off before going to the mikveh? So first of all, the concept of going to mikveh, the idea is to go in, rachas is called besara, to wash entirely. But more halachically, the concern is that if there's a small chip in the nail polish on one of the nails, people may not want to go to, let's say, a wedding that way, and they would have it redone for a wedding. So true, would I care at home to have that chip nail polish? No. But if I was going out to a function, then I would want to redo it. So at what point do I consider that a makbid, something that I really don't want there? And if one of the nails are chipped, and therefore I want to change that one, so then I'm going to want to change them all, because I want them, if I'm going to a function, I want them to all look neat and nice the same. So that's why the halachic suggestion always is if there's something on, take it off, so as to make sure that it's not going to be a chatzitza, both in concept, so that the concept of the mikvah is there, as well as halachically you don't have you're leaving it subjectively and saying, well, do you care or do you not? But of course, if somebody already went to the mikvah and then later they found that one of the nails maybe has a chip, or they forgot to take off their nail polish, that would not invalidate the having gone to the mikvah based on this idea. Mechitzos, and also boundaries, barriers, are also halacha mishmasine. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? The Oraisen, and those are also on a Torah level. Damar Mar, as we learned, Aron Tisha v'kaparas tefach harei kanasar. The Aron, the ark, was 9 tefachim tall, and on top of it, it had the cover, the kaparas, which was 1 tefach, which was a total of 10. And that's why we see, and the reason for that is because Shekhinah spoke from above the ark to Am Yisrael, and to Moshe and to Am Yisrael, and so therefore, and we know, as we saw, the Gemara tells us in Sukkah, that Shekhinah never comes down below 10 tefachim. 10 tefachim is earth space, and Shekhinah is always above 10 tefachim. And so Shekhinah spoke above the 10 tefachim, and from there we see that, let's say, the halacha of Rishus HaRabim only goes up to 10 tefachim. The public domain only goes up to 10 tefachim, because above 10 tefachim is not earth space anymore. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Amas Binyan ba'ama bashisha. No, we need that because according to Rabbi Yehuda, that says that only in construction of the Beis Hamikdash and the Mishkan was a measure of 6 tefachim, 6 tefachim per amma. But Amas Keil ba'ama bas chamisha. But in the vessels, and the ark would be a part of the vessels, it was 5 tefachim. So therefore, you still had in the 10 tefachim of the ark, you still had space within an amma to 1 tefach space where it would be below below the measure. Well, fine. Okay, so according to him, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to need the measures to tell us 10 tefachim, to tell us space. But according to Rabbi Meir, what I need barriers according to him for the Amar Kol Amasayu Beinoni Ismail Lamema. Rabbi Meir Kiyase Hilchasa. Where does this halacha come for? It comes for these 3 concepts that we have throughout this Masechta. Good, that when you have a barrier at the top, we're going to say that barrier comes down all the way to the ground. if you have a structure that has a barrier at the top that we say good asik mechitza, a good achis mechitza, that the mechitza comes down all the way to the ground, or good asik mechitza, that it goes all the way up, and we'll talk about many times where that comes up. Also, lavud, that we extend a measure within 3 tfachim. So if you had slats, that counts as a barrier, or a fence, a wire fence, that counts as a barrier, even though that there's a lot of airspace, but they're within 3 tfachim of each other, so it extends. And dofen akuma. In regards to sukkah, we mentioned this yesterday, that if you had at the corner of your sukkah, at the edge of the wall, the non-valid schach, we're going to say the wall arches until your schach up to 4 amos. So these measures are leniencies in halacha that say that this counts as a barrier, even though that it isn't there physically. Just as we understand a fence is a barrier, even though that there's more airspace, perhaps, than the substance there. Nevertheless, it counts as a barrier on the basis of lavud. So too we have good, and we have dofen akuma.